The lunch crowd swelled through Magnolia's heavy wooden doors like a tide, salt air mixing with the smell of butter and Old Bay seasoning. Katie Rodriguez tied her apron strings as she moved through the dining room, her movements precise and economical, the kind of efficiency that came from years of something else entirely, something she kept folded away like the faded unit patch sewn inside her jacket lining, hidden beneath the black server's vest. She didn't belong here. But she was very good at belonging nowhere. The restaurant gleamed with the careful polish of a place that cultivated atmosphere. Exposed brick walls the color of dried blood. Edison bulbs casting amber light across white tablecloths. Windows overlooking Forsyth Park, where the fountain threw its spray upward in the March sunlight. A young woman in a server's black vest, dark hair pulled back, wearing non-slip shoes that marked her as staff, that was all anyone saw. No one noticed the small scar tissue mapping her left forearm, or the way her hands moved through space as if she'd already anticipated where every obstacle would be. Vincent Hartwell ruled Magnolia's like a dictator ruling a territory he'd conquered and still feared losing. He was 48, expensively cut grey at his temples, the kind of man who pressed his dress shirts with military precision and wore cufflinks that probably cost more than Katie's monthly rent. He stood near the host stand, monitoring the floor with the intensity of a man watching for theft, his eyes moving between tables like a security camera on a loop. Katie had been at Magnolia's for 3 weeks. It took her 2 days to notice the invoices didn't match the deliveries. She'd been organizing the walk-in cooler on a slow Tuesday morning, temperature hovering at exactly 38 degrees Fahrenheit, the air tasting like cold metal and fish. The boxes of shrimp came in daily, Gulf white shrimp, Gulf pink shrimp, Gulf royal reds in 5-pound portions. The invoices were clipped to a clipboard Hartwell kept in his office. Katie had access to the cooler, had the responsibility of rotating stock and noting inventory levels. She was careful. She didn't ask questions that weren't hers to ask. But the math was wrong. A box marked premium Gulf white, $34.50 per pound, contained the exact same size shrimp as the box marked daily special, $12.75 per pound. Same supplier code stamped on both. Same date. She'd seen it 3 times in 7 days. The premium label went to table customers. The special label went to the lunch bar. Same shrimp. Different prices. The duplicate receipt books were hidden behind the industrial freezer, rubber-banded, and marked with dates that didn't correspond to any legitimate transactions. Katie photographed nothing. She reported nothing. She simply saw it and filed it away. Hartwell noticed her noticing. He came into the cooler while she was counting inventory the following morning, his presence shifting the air pressure in the small space. He stood there for 7 seconds, she counted, watching her work without speaking. His cologne was expensive, something with cedar and leather. His shoes were Italian leather, polished to a gloss. Everything in order? His voice was smooth as clarified butter, the kind of smooth that could sear skin. Yes, Katie said. She didn't turn from the shelves. Stock rotation is current. Temperatures are holding steady. You've been taking an interest in the ordering, he said. Not a question. Just trying to understand the system. She turned then, meeting his eyes for exactly half a second before looking back at the boxes. Better at the job if I understand the operation. Hartwell smiled. It was the kind of smile a shark might offer before deciding whether you were worth eating. The operation doesn't concern you. Your concern is getting food to tables hot and keeping customers happy. Everything else, that's my problem. Understood. Is it? He moved closer. The space between them compressed. Because it seems like someone's been very curious about invoices and deliveries. Someone's been opening boxes that aren't labeled for her station. Katie's hands continued working, muscle memory taking over. She pulled a box of Chilean sea base forward, checking the date code. 3 days old. Still good. Still within standard. I organize the cooler. That's the job. See, that's the thing about hiring community college kids, Hartwell said, his voice dipping into a register that was almost conversational, almost friendly. The most dangerous register a man like him could use. You get bright eyes. Ambition. Sometimes you get the kind of curiosity that costs them more than it's worth. I'm trying to give you a heads up. Be curious about your tables. Not my business. He left. His footsteps retreated down the hallway. The cooler door swung shut behind him with the soft hydraulic hiss of the pneumatic closer. Katie continued organizing. Her breathing remained steady. One foot in front of the other. The trembling that wanted to start in her hands, that belonged to someone else, someone who wasn't wearing the carefully constructed identity of a community college student named Katie Rodriguez trying to earn enough for tuition. The lunch rush started at 11:37 a.m. By noon, every table in the dining room was occupied. The kitchen moved at the speed of controlled chaos. Orders flew through the expo window. Plates came up. Voices overlapped in that particular restaurant symphony of clanging steel and shouting voices and the sound of the French fryer basket plunging into oil that hissed like live ammunition. Katie moved through it all without noise. She carried 3 plates at once, her hands steady as surgical instruments. She anticipated what her tables needed before they lifted their eyes to call for her. Water refills before glasses dipped below the halfway mark. Bread service before the basket emptied. She read people the way a hunter reads weather, subtle shifts in body language that meant someone was satisfied or frustrated or about to become a problem. She was refilling water glasses at table 7 when she felt the shift. Not a sound. Not yet. Just the way the light changed slightly, the way air currents adjusted to accommodate a new presence in the room. Someone important had entered. Not because of noise or fanfare. Because of the quality of weight that followed them. Katie looked up. An older man sat down in her section, alone at table 12 by the window. Military bearing even in civilian clothes, navy blazer, grey dress shirt, no tie. His hair was salt and pepper grey, cut short and precise. His hands, folded on the table, bore the kind of calluses that came from rope work and firearms and decades of holding on to something that could kill you if you let go. He was 60-some years old, maybe older. The kind of man whose age was irrelevant because what remained was pure function. Her chest tightened. She knew those hands. She'd seen them before, in a different place, in a different lifetime. They'd held the letter that changed everything. The letter that said her son was coming home. Colonel Marcus Webb looked directly at her, and his grey eyes registered something that made his hands pause in their folded position. Katie's feet didn't move. Her breathing didn't change. But somewhere deep in the architecture of her body, alarms began to fire in patterns she'd learned long ago to recognize and suppress. He'd only seen her once. 3 years ago. A graduation ceremony. Daniel's graduation. Webb had delivered the remarks about sacrifice and honor while Katie sat in the back of the auditorium, separated from her son by rank and clearance and the invisible walls that had been constructed around her the moment she'd treated the wrong patient in the Hindu Kush and been ordered to disappear. The moment her service records were scrubbed clean. The moment Captain Katie Rodriguez had ceased to exist and Katie Rodriguez, community college student, had taken her place. Webb was looking at her now with the expression of a man trying to place a face that didn't belong. She approached his table. Her hands were steady. Her voice, when she spoke, was careful and modulated and stripped of every inflection that might mark her as anything other than a server in a Savannah restaurant. Welcome to Magnolia's. Have you been here before? He continued looking at her for another 3 seconds. She watched his military bearing make calculations. His eyes moved from her face to her hands. Lingered on the scar tissue mapping her left forearm. She saw the moment he decided whether she was a threat or a ghost or just a woman who happened to move like someone trained. First time, he said finally. I'll have the she-crab soup and the flounder special. Excellent choice. Something to drink. Sweet tea. Lots of ice. She repeated the order back to him, confirmation, clarity, the small ritual of her job, and turned from his table. Her pulse remained steady as a metronome. Her hands didn't shake when she clipped the order into the kitchen ticket rail. But as she passed through the service area, moving toward the drink station, she felt the weight of his attention following her across the room like the barrel of a rifle following a target. Webb was here. Her son's commanding officer was sitting alone in her section, ordering lunch. And if there was one thing she'd learned in the Hindu Kush, it was that coincidence was the luxury of people who believed in luck. The lunch rush hit Magnolia's like a rip tide, every table full, every server moving in controlled chaos. Katie carried 4 plates down her left arm, water pitcher balanced on her right hand, weaving between tourists who couldn't decide if they wanted remoulade with their crab cakes. Colonel Webb had ordered the lunch special, shrimp over grits, the irony not lost on her, and he sat reading a paperback with the kind of patience that only came from having waited through worse things than lunch service. Vincent Hartwell owned the Expo line like a general commanded his supply chain. 53 years old, inherited money that his grandfather made in shipping, tailored shirts that probably cost what Katie made in 2 weeks. His voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone who mattered. He was already watching her when she placed Webb's plate in the window. She could feel it. The weight of his attention was a pressure in the room, the way predators learn to sense when prey has moved into open ground. Rodriguez. Not a call. A summons. She turned, already moving toward the pass, already cataloguing what might be wrong. The plate was hot. The garnish was correct, 3 mint leaves, no more, no less, the way the head chef demanded. The portion was exact. But Hartwell's expression had the peculiar satisfaction of someone who had already decided what he would find wrong. Come here. He raised his voice, not shouting yet, but pitched to carry. Everyone. Expo line. Now. The kitchen staff stopped moving. Marcus, the sous chef, looked up from his sauté station. 2 line cooks abandoned their stations. Even the dishwasher paused. Katie felt the shift before she saw it, the moment staff became an audience. Hartwell had choreographed this with the precision of someone who understood that humiliation required witnesses. He pulled a plate from the window. Not hers. A tray of crab cakes, golden and glistening, the kind that moved at $18 a plate. The kind customers came back for. He held it suspended over the pass like an executioner examining a condemned man's final meal. This, Hartwell said, is how not to plate a protein course. He inverted the tray. The crab cakes fell like a cascade of judgment, scattering across the stainless steel surface, rolling onto the floor, landing among the silt and salt that accumulated in any kitchen that moved the volume Magnolia's did. The smell hit first, old fryer oil mixing with seafood, a smell that would cling to everything until closing. One landed near Marcus's left boot. Another skid under the reach-in cooler. See how the chef prepared these. Hartwell's voice had taken on the tone of an instructor at a military academy, clinical and cutting. And then Rodriguez over here decides to add her own artistic interpretation. Katie's hands were still. Her breathing was still. The trick, she had learned in the Hindu Kush, was to understand that shame was a choice. You could witness it happening to yourself, could observe the faces around you registering your humiliation, and still not invite it inside. One measured breath. She took it. I want them picked up, Hartwell said. Every single one. By hand. Now. We have customers waiting. She moved to the pass. The floor was still warm from the kitchen's heat, and the oil from the fryer made the crab cake pieces slick. Her hands found each one, 7 total, scattered in a rough arc like shrapnel from an explosion. Behind her, through the service window, she could see the dining room. A family of 4 had stopped eating. A couple on a date turned to look. A woman with a camera phone started recording, the little red dot of capture light blinking. Hartwell watched her retrieve each piece. When she stood, holding them cupped in her palms, some juice running toward her wrists, he smiled. You know what your problem is, Rodriguez? You want to work at a nice restaurant. You want to wear the white shirt and the black pants and pretend you're part of something professional. But you're not ready for this level of service. Katie placed the pieces in the trash, then moved to the sink. The water ran hot, and she pressed her palms against the metal, letting the temperature tell her something true about the world. Hartwell wasn't finished. "Take your break," he said. "Walk the dining room. Take a good look at who's eating here. Because these people pay for precision. They pay for excellence. And what they got today was you." One of the line cooks, a kid named Trevor who was working through culinary school, looked away. Marcus studied his sauté pan with sudden intensity. The dishwasher had already turned back to his station. Katie dried her hands on her apron. Her register had been pulled at the top of the rush, as it always was, and she had placed it in the office safe with the deposit slip. $273 in ones, fives, and tens. She knew because she always counted twice. Precision was not something you performed for an audience. It was something you did because it was the only way that made sense. She returned to the floor with the kind of posture that comes from having already survived the worst. The tourists kept eating. The couple on the date looked away, uncomfortable. Webb was reading his book. He hadn't seen any of it, and she was grateful in a way that bypassed all thinking. An hour later, as the rush began to collapse into the afternoon lull, Hartwell called her into the office. Her register was on the desk. She noticed immediately a $5 bill that shouldn't have been there. Then a 10. Then another 5. Her stomach didn't drop. Her vision didn't narrow. She just looked at the bills like they were interesting geological specimens. "Interesting," Hartwell said, leaning back in his chair. The leather creaked. He had a paring knife in his hand, the kind used for trimming fruit, and he was running it back and forth across his palm in a gesture that was supposed to seem casual. "Your drawer came up $20 over." $20 is a lot of mistakes, Rodriguez. "I counted it twice." Her voice was even. "Once during my shift. Once before I secured it. Yet here we are. With $20 extra in your register." He set the knife down on the desk, very deliberately, as if placing a piece in a chess game. "What am I supposed to think? That the money fairy visited? That St. Nicholas felt generous?" Katie looked at the bills. She looked at Hartwell. She thought about the field hospital in Cunha province, where she had run a surgical recovery ward with 12 beds and sometimes for times that many patients. She had taught herself to make decisions about life and death with the same precision she now applied to counting cash. This was simple arithmetic compared to that. "I'd like to count the drawer again," she said. "With witnesses." The words hung in the office air. Hartwell's expression shifted. She saw it flash across his face, the small irritation of someone whose script had just gone off book. He had expected her to cry, maybe. To make excuses. To crumble under the weight of the accusation. "Fine," he said. "Get Marcus and Trevor. Count away." The three of them stood in the office while Katie removed each bill from her register drawer. She called them out as she stacked them. Ones. Fives. Tens. 20s. The numbers accumulated in her voice with the precision of a woman reading coordinates to an artillery unit. When she reached the end, the total was exactly $273. No extra bills. No phantom 20s. Just the register pull, accounted for down to the penny. Marcus looked at Hartwell. Trevor looked at Marcus. Hartwell stood very still, and Katie watched the moment when he understood that his strategy had failed. "The deposit slip," Hartwell said finally. "Must have been an error on your side." Katie looked at him. Just looked. Then she took the deposit slip from her apron pocket, unfolded it, and placed it on the desk. $273. The number written in her own handwriting, matched to the bills, matched to the count she had just performed in front of 2 witnesses. "That would have required me," she said, "to write down a different number than what I counted. Twice." She did not cry. She did not tremble. She did not break eye contact. There was only one tear that escaped, and she wiped it away with the back of her hand, a gesture so small that only someone watching her very carefully would have noticed it was the only crack in her composure. "I counted that drawer twice," she said again, and her voice had found a register that hadn't been there before, a tone that carried the weight of absolute certainty. "I'm happy to count it a third time with anyone you want to bring in." It wasn't a request. It was a statement of fact delivered with the same authority that had once cleared an operating theatre when she was the person deciding who lived and who didn't. She was no longer asking for permission or forgiveness. She was simply telling the truth, as if truth were the only currency that mattered. Hartwell looked away first. That night, Katie took her break in the walk-in cooler, where the temperature was held at 38 degrees and the hum of the compressor made a sound like white noise. She stood among the boxes of fish and shrimp, among the duplicate receipts and the systematic theft that Hartwell had been running for at least 3 years, and she understood something fundamental: he would not stop. The humiliation would escalate. The accusation would morph. He would find another angle because his real problem was not her alleged incompetence. His real problem was that she had seen the books, and she had the kind of mind that noticed discrepancies. She was still standing there, breath misting slightly in the cold air, when the intercom crackled in the kitchen. Code blue. Trauma incoming. 2 minutes. At first, Katie didn't process it. Code blue was a hospital term. Magnolia's was a restaurant. Then she heard the kitchen staff stop moving. Through the small window in the cooler door, she could see people stepping outside. The sound started as a whisper. Then it became a siren. Then it became the roar of a helicopter descending onto the street outside the restaurant, its rotors throwing rain and wind in a violence that made the old building shake. And that's when everything she had built as a cover story became irrelevant, because some things could not be hidden, and some people could not be left to die, no matter what orders had been written in classified files that were supposed to remain buried. The doors burst open. 2 soldiers in uniform, carrying something between them. The thing they were carrying was a person, and the person was bleeding. The room tilted. Colonel Webb's hand clutched his chest mid-bite. His fork clattered against the plate. For a moment nobody moved. The lunch crowd kept talking, silverware kept clicking, the kitchen hummed its usual rhythm. Then Webb's shoulder hit the table edge, and his body followed, collapsing between 2 occupied tables like a building losing its last support beam. Someone screamed. A woman in a blue sundress stood up so fast her chair overturned backward. A waiter named David froze with a water pitcher suspended at shoulder height. The ambient noise, the gentle murmur of conversation and clink of glasses, shattered into chaos. Phone calls. Shouting. 3 servers rushing toward the collapsed man. But Katie was already moving. She didn't walk. She crossed the dining room in 4 strides, muscle memory overriding every civilian instinct. Her body moved the way it had moved for 14 years, not rushed, not panicked. Decisive. The way you move when 300 souls are depending on you to remember your training under fire. Webb's face was ashen. His skin had that particular color, not pale, but gray. The kind of gray that meant something catastrophic was happening inside. Katie knelt beside him, fingers already moving toward his neck. His trachea deviated sharply to the right. His jaw was clenched. When she placed her hand against his left ribs, she felt nothing. No breath sounds. No vibration. The lung had collapsed. "Call 911, she said. Her voice had dropped an octave. Gone was the deferential server. What emerged was something else entirely. Something that made the other staff members stop mid-panic and listen. "Now." "I'm calling," David stammered. "I'm calling." Tension pneumothorax, Katie said to no one in particular. To herself. To the muscle memory living in her hands from 1,000 nights in a field hospital in the Hindu Kush where the walls shook from mortar fire and you had to work in the dark because the generators were down again. She needed supplies. She needed them now. "I need a knife. Sanitized. And vodka from the bar. Move." A busboy, a kid named Marcus, couldn't have been older than 19, didn't ask questions. He ran toward the kitchen. Katie already had her fingers positioned. Second intercostal space. Midclavicular line. The spot where air had trapped itself between Webb's lung and his chest wall, collapsing the tissue, crushing his heart toward the opposite side of his thorax. Marcus returned with a serrated steak knife and a bottle of premium vodka. Katie took the knife and poured vodka over the blade. She reached into the front pocket of her server's apron and withdrew a ballpoint pen, the kind restaurants stock by the hundreds. She sanitized it the same way, the alcohol running clear down the aluminum shaft. The crowd had grown. 30 people, maybe 40, had moved closer. The manager from the front desk. 2 other servers. Customers who should have been staying in their seats but couldn't help themselves. They formed a loose circle around Katie and the colonel, watching her movements with the kind of silent attention usually reserved for surgery. She didn't look at them. She couldn't. There was only Webb. Only the tactical problem of a man whose body was fighting itself. The knife moved. One precise cut through skin and membrane. The effort was minimal. She'd done this in darkness, in helicopters, in trucks with no equipment beyond a field kit and muscle memory. She discarded the knife and brought the pen to the opening. Positioned it. Breathed once. The hiss of air escaping filled the room like a pressure valve releasing. The sound was unmistakable once you'd heard it, the mechanical rush of an entire collapsed lung expanding. Patients always described it differently later, a pop, a whistle, a release. But in the moment, it was the sound of a body remembering how to live. Katie's hand was steady. Her voice was steady. All the trembling the world never saw, the kind that comes from a decade of seeing things that break normal humans into pieces, that trembling lived in the space between her ribs, not in her hands. Never in her hands. Blood pressure, she said. David was still on the phone with dispatch. I don't have. Look at his color. Is it changing? She was reading Webb's face the way you read a monitor. The gray was giving way to something closer to normal. His breathing had returned. Not strong, but present. The collapsed lung was re-expanding. She'd bought him time. Not much time. An ambulance was maybe 4 minutes out. She could hear sirens in the distance now, still far but closing. Seattle General was 7 minutes from downtown. Katie reached for Webb's wrist. Pulse was fast but steady. 120, maybe higher. The adrenaline spike every trauma patient got when they realized they might actually survive. That's when Webb's eyes found hers. For 3 seconds neither of them moved. Recognition. His lips moved. Nothing came out at first. Then a whisper, rough as gravel, barely audible beneath the continuing chaos around them, wildfire. The word hung in the air like a flare. It was her call sign. The one she'd earned in a place officially erased from all records, classified so deeply that the files no longer existed in any database that could be searched. She'd been Captain Catherine Rodriguez, Trauma Surgical Team, attached to a Black Ops unit that had no name and no official existence. 12 years. 3 deployments. A field hospital built from scraps in the Hindu Kush under mortar fire. And when it all went sideways, when the Kandahar operation was buried and the Pentagon's lawyers decided she knew too much, she was ordered to disappear. Her records were scrubbed. Her identity was erased. She was told in a secure room by a general whose name she was instructed never to write down that surfacing, existing, speaking about her service would endanger everyone she'd ever served with. So she'd vanished. Become nobody. Become a server at a restaurant called Magnolia's, wearing non-slip shoes and folding napkins and counting the register twice because Vincent Hartwell was a thief and she couldn't help herself from noticing. And now Webb, Marcus Webb, Colonel in the 3rd Battalion 5th Marines, Daniel's commanding officer, the man who'd written the letter telling her Daniel was coming home safe, had spoken her call sign in a dining room full of witnesses. She didn't move. Her hand remained on his wrist. Her eyes remained level. But the world had just shifted beneath the floorboards, and Katie felt the ground opening up in ways she couldn't control. The sirens were closer now. The sound of emergency brakes squealing in the parking lot. Paramedics would be through the door in seconds. They would take Webb. They would transport him to Seattle General. And somewhere in that sequence of events, someone would ask him who he was, and he would give them a name, and that name would connect to official records, and those records would somehow connect to the woman who'd just saved his life with a ballpoint pen and vodka. She released his wrist, sat back, wiped her hands on a napkin with the same careful precision she used for everything, the precision of a woman who'd learned that control was the only currency that mattered. The red and white lights began painting the windows. The paramedics burst through the double doors. Katie stood, creating space, becoming invisible again. Just a server. Just another person in the crowd. Except Vincent Hartwell was standing 10 feet away, near the host stand, and his face had gone the same ashen grey as Webb's had been before the needle decompression. His eyes had seen everything. The precision of her movements. The terminology that had slipped out. The way she'd commanded the room without authority. The way her hands had moved like someone who'd done this thousands of times before. And in his expression, Katie saw the beginning of his calculation. The moment when the pieces started assembling themselves into a shape he understood. What happened next would end careers. Within the hour, Vincent Hartwell stood in his office with the phone pressed against his ear, his free hand clenching and unclenching. The owner of Magnolia's was listening on the other end, and Hartwell had exactly 3 minutes to make this stick before the dinner service shifted into full gear. She performed unauthorized medical procedures, Hartwell said, his voice tight with fabricated concern. Untrained emergency intervention. You saw the footage, she acted like she owns the place. That's liability. That's lawsuit territory. The owner asked a question. Hartwell's jaw tightened. No, sir, she had no credentials on file. Just a server. A community college kid with delusions. She could have made his condition worse. We're exposed. The call ended. Hartwell hung up and immediately dialed a second number. The admissions office at Savannah Community College answered on the third ring. I'm calling to verify enrollment for a Katie Rodriguez, he said, his tone businesslike and official. She lists it on her employment application. Just a background check. Can you confirm her status as a current student? There was a pause. Then, we don't have anyone by that name enrolled in any program. Hartwell's smile spread across his face like spilled oil. And there's no record of prior attendance either. No, sir. Nothing in our system. He thanked them and hung up. 2 calls down. 1 more to go. The health inspector answered on the first ring, they always did when Hartwell called. 17 months of envelope payments will do that. $500 a month, cash, left in the inspector's mailbox. The man knew the rhythm. I need you to make a surprise visit, Hartwell said quietly. Within the next 48 hours. Preferably during service. What's the issue? Employee safety protocols. Unsanctioned medical procedures being performed on premises. Creates contamination risks, health code violations. I need documentation that our establishment took corrective action. Remove the problem employee, and we pass inspection. Keep her, and we fail hard. The inspector understood. The payment arrangement continued only if Magnolia stayed clean on paper. 1 phone call to corporate oversight would end both their arrangements. Hartwell was giving him a reason to force the issue. I'll be there Thursday, the inspector said. Hartwell hung up and checked his watch. 6:06 p.m. Katie was prepping her tables for the dinner shift, unaware that her employment was already being dismantled 3 phone calls at a time. He walked onto the floor and found her wiping down the bar station, her movements efficient and practiced. She didn't look up. Rodriguez. My office. Now. Katie set down the cloth and followed him without question. That was the thing about her, she never argued, never demanded explanations. She simply complied. Which meant she suspected nothing. In the office, Hartwell queued up the security footage on his computer. He'd spent 40 minutes editing it, cutting and splicing to make her emergency intervention look chaotic and reckless. The audio was pulled from a conversation 3 days ago about a broken ice machine. He'd laid it over footage of her kneeling beside Webb, creating the appearance of her shouting orders, waving her hands, contaminating a medical scene. "Look at this," he said, turning the monitor toward her. Katie watched in silence. The edited footage played. Her expression didn't change. "That's you performing medical procedures without authorization. Creating a hazard in my restaurant. Endangering the establishment." Hartwell leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled. "I've contacted the health department. I've contacted your school, which informs me you're not actually a student there. And I've documented this incident thoroughly." Katie's eyes met his for exactly 1 second. Then she looked away. "You're fired," Hartwell said. "Effective immediately. Security will escort you out. You'll surrender your keys, your badge, and any company property. You will not return to this building." Katie nodded once. "Understood. I'm doing this because I have a responsibility to my customers and my staff. What you did was reckless. You could have killed that man." She didn't respond. Didn't defend herself. Didn't even blink. "You can collect your things from your locker. You have 5 minutes. Then out." She left the office without a word. Hartwell watched her through the glass partition as she moved toward the employee area, down the narrow hallway that led to the locker room. She walked like she was moving through water, not slow, exactly, but measured. Like each step was a choice being made with full awareness. 20 minutes later, Katie stood in the basement laundry room at midnight. The shift had ended hours ago. The kitchen was dark. The dining room was empty except for the ghost of candlelight on cloth napkins. She folded her server's apron into thirds. Then halves. Then into a perfect square that could fit in the palm of her hand. The non-slip black shoes came next. She set them heel to toe, pressed them into the plastic bag with her apron. The basement smelled like bleach and detergent, like every basement of every restaurant she'd worked in. There was a single overhead light that hummed at a frequency she could feel in her molars. Her badge, the laminated card with her picture and a name that wasn't hers, went into the bag last. She sat down on the edge of a utility sink, the plastic bag in her lap. The rain had been falling for 6 hours. She could hear it through the small basement window, the patter of it against the metal grate outside. In Kandahar, rain was violent. It came in sheets that turned the dust to mud in seconds, that made the roads collapse into themselves. This rain was softer. American rain. The kind that whispered instead of screaming. Katie pulled her jacket tighter around her ribs. Inside the lining, sewn into a pocket that nobody had ever found, was a patch. Faded olive drab with a ranger's tab. A unit patch from another life. She'd kept it there through every shift, every insult, every moment of pretending to be someone she wasn't. 18 months of this. She could feel it against her skin, like a heartbeat that belonged to someone else. The folded apron in the bag seemed impossibly small. A server's uniform cost $42 to replace. Her career, the real one, the classified one, the one that officially didn't exist, was worth -$600,000 in Pentagon erasure protocols. They'd spent that much money making her disappear. Making her into a ghost in a restaurant in Savannah. Making her into someone who got fired for saving a life. She held the bag in both hands, staring at the humble weight of it. Shoes. Apron. Badge. The physical evidence that she had been reduced to just another worker. Just another person who could be discarded. Katie opened the bag and looked at the unit patch visible through the jacket lining. She could take scissors from the kitchen. Cut it out. Leave it here. Let it dissolve into the industrial laundry cycles. Let magnolias wash away any last piece of Captain Katie Rodriguez. Her hands didn't shake. Soldiers don't cry. But her eyes burned in the basement light, and she closed them for 3 seconds. Just 3. She thought about the letter her son Daniel had sent 6 months before she vanished into this cover. She thought about his unit. She thought about Colonel Marcus Webb reading the names of the wounded. She thought about his eyes recognizing her in the restaurant and his hand reaching for hers as she saved his life. She thought about all the reasons they told her she could never be found. Katie sat with the bag for 7 minutes, her hand on the jacket pocket. The patch was still there. Still real. Still hers. She was about to close the bag, to accept the firing, to accept the disappearance within the disappearance, when she heard it. A distant sound, growing closer. Rotors. The specific percussion of a Black Hawk helicopter cutting through the night sky. It wasn't overhead yet. But it was coming. Katie stood up, the plastic bag forgotten on the sink. She climbed the basement stairs and pushed through the back door of Magnolia's, stepping out into the rain that immediately soaked through her shirt. The rotor sound grew louder. Closer. Not one aircraft. Multiple aircraft. She looked up into the darkness above the restaurant, and for the first time since Kandahar, she felt the ground shift beneath her feet, not from fear, but from the precise certainty that something had fundamentally changed. The rain hit her face. She didn't wipe it away. And in that moment, standing alone in the downpour with her classified identity about to detonate into the civilian world, Captain Katie Rodriguez heard what she'd been waiting 18 months to hear, the sound of someone coming to collect her. The helicopter rotors faded into the dawn as Colonel Marcus Webb appeared in the doorway of Magnolia's at 7:51 a.m., moving slowly but upright, his dress uniform pressed sharp enough to cut. Rain had stopped during the night. The dining room smelled like wet tile and old grease, the smell of a place that had no idea what was about to happen inside its walls. Webb's eye swept the empty lunch setup and found Katie at the hostess stand, collecting her final paycheck from a clerk who barely looked at her. She was still in civilian clothes. Still invisible. The way she'd been trained to be. He went pale. The color drained from his face like someone had opened a valve. His hand found the edge of the bar to steady himself. And when she turned to leave, when their eyes met across 20 feet of abandoned dining room, he whispered one word so quiet it barely carried. Wildfire. Katie stopped moving. Her shoulders locked in a posture that wasn't civilian anymore, a posture that came from standing at attention under enemy fire, from holding position when everything around you was burning. She turned to face him fully. The paycheck crumpled in her hand. A master sergeant stepped through the door behind Webb, pressed uniform, ribbon stacked like a bookshelf. He was carrying a leather portfolio. His boots clicked against the tile with military precision, one step after another, the rhythm of boots that had walked through Kandahar and Fallujah and a dozen places that didn't appear on maps. The master sergeant opened the portfolio and began to read, his voice filling the restaurant like a command that had weight behind it, like an announcement that changed the air pressure in the room. Captain Katie Rodriguez, Army Nurse Corps, Silver Star Favela under fire while treating casualties during a 12-hour siege at Forward Operating Base Shank, Loga Province. Citation reads, despite sustained mortar fire and active sniper positions, Captain Rodriguez refused evacuation, establishing a surgical field hospital in a reinforced bunker, performing 19 emergency procedures under fire, saving 41 lives including 3 members of her own unit. Her composure under extreme duress and her refusal to abandon her post exemplifies the highest standards of military medicine and personal courage. The citation hung in the air. Each word was a piece of her identity being reassembled in front of witnesses who had no context for it, no framework for understanding that the woman who'd been folding aprons in a restaurant basement 12 hours ago had once led a field hospital through mortar fire. Vincent Hartwell appeared from the kitchen, his face arranging itself into something that looked like a smile but wasn't. He laughed. It came out strangled, forced, a sound a man makes when he's trying to control something spinning out of his control. That's very impressive storytelling, Colonel, but I think you've got the wrong person here. This is just... A 2-star general walked through the front door. His dress uniform caught the morning light coming through the windows. He moved toward Katie with the kind of economy of motion that comes from 40 years of command, and when he reached her, he raised his right hand in a slow salute. Not quick. Deliberate. Respectful. A salute that said this woman ranked above everyone in the building, above the manager sputtering behind the counter, above the expectations of a restaurant that had decided she was disposable. Webb pinned 2 silver stars onto Katie's civilian jacket, one above each pocket. The stars caught the light. They were heavy with meaning, weighted with the gravity of a decision made in a government building in Arlington, Virginia, a decision that Katie was now reinstated, that her records were unsealed, that the erasure was over. Hartwell's laugh died in his throat. His jaw worked like a man trying to form words that wouldn't come. He straightened his shirt, tugged it down, gathering himself for one more attempt to maintain control. Listen, I don't know what this is, but this is my establishment, and I'm not sure you have authorization to. You need to leave now, Katie said. Her voice had dropped an octave. It wasn't a request. It wasn't even phrased as one. Hartwell's face flushed red. He pointed at her, his hand shaking now, the tremor visible from across the room. You performed unauthorized medical procedures on a customer. You endangered people. You violated health codes. I have documentation. I have security footage. I have? The front door opened again. 2 FBI agents in dark windbreakers, badges flashing like coins in the early light. One was tall, moving with the kind of precision that comes from federal training. The other was shorter, more compact, but there was something in his eyes that said he'd seen worse than a small-time restaurant manager trying to cover up fraud. The tall agent pulled a warrant from his jacket. Vincent Pierce, we have a federal warrant for evidence tampering, conspiracy to file false documentation, obstruction of justice. The Pentagon's investigation into Captain Rodriguez's compromised identity led us to your business records. Hartwell took a step backward. His face went from red to gray. I don't. What investigation? I didn't. Forensic accountants found altered supplier contracts, falsified health inspection records, and correspondence indicating you attempted to forge Captain Rodriguez's personnel documentation to create legal liability against her, the shorter agent said. His voice was flat, the voice of someone who delivered this kind of news 1,000 times. You were trying to manufacture grounds to terminate her employment before she connected the dots on your billing scheme. The words landed like impact rounds. The kitchen staff had begun to gather in the dining room now, busboys, line cooks, the other servers standing in doorways, watching a man they'd seen give orders and make decisions and control everything suddenly shrink inside his own skin. The seafood invoices, Katie said. She wasn't asking. She was stating. The duplicate receipts. You were charging premium prices and delivering product from the discount bins. How much was it? 2, 3 years of billing fraud. Hartwell opened his mouth. His hands came up, palms out, a gesture of surrender or negotiation or some last attempt to convince someone, anyone, that this was all a misunderstanding. Then his composure cracked. His face contorted. He screamed, an actual scream, the kind of sound a man makes when he realizes the architecture of his power has collapsed in minutes. You think you're smarter than me? You think you can come in here and she was stealing? She was. You planted money in her register, the tall FBI agent said. Not a question. A statement of fact. We recovered footage from a traffic camera showing you placing currency in the cash drawer 3 minutes before accusing her of register overage. Hartwell lunged. His hand reached toward Katie's arm, the same way he'd done 100 times, grabbing, directing, controlling. This time his fingers were inches away when the shorter agent pivoted smoothly, intercepted the motion, and in seconds Hartwell's arms were behind his back, the click of restraint cuffs echoing through the silent restaurant like a gunshot. The agents walked him out through the dining room. Past the staff. Past the servers who'd watched him humiliate Katie. Past the kitchen crew that had heard every insult. His face was blotchy. Tears were running down his cheeks now, the kind of crying that comes from rage and fear and the understanding that everything, the business, the apartment, the network of favors and connections that had propped up his authority, was gone. The crew watched him being escorted into an unmarked sedan parked outside. The door closed. The car pulled away. It was 8:13 a.m. 6 months later, Katie was consulting for the Surgeon General's office, flying between installations, teaching Army nurses how to build surgical capacity in austere environments, how to maintain composure when the ceiling was flying shrapnel and the patient was a kid who shouldn't have been anywhere near a combat zone. She was in a medical supply warehouse in Tacoma when she saw him. Vincent Hartwell was driving a white van with a contractor logo on the side. He'd lost weight. His hair had grayed completely. He was making deliveries, legitimate ones this time, boxes of surgical supplies, bandages, chest seals, the equipment Katie had used to save Colonel Webb's life. He was reading the invoice against the box contents, checking numbers, verifying accuracy. He never looked up. Never noticed her standing 50 feet away, watching him deliver the exact same supplies he'd once counterfeited with such confidence, with such certainty that he'd never face consequence. Katie turned away. There was nothing to say. The work spoke for itself. That night, alone in a hotel room in Seattle, she unpacked her dress uniform. The unit patch was still there, the one that had survived 18 months of folding and refolding, the one that had stayed sewn inside her server's jacket lining through every shift, every humiliation, every moment of erasure. It was faded, the colors muted by time and concealment, but the insignia was unmistakable, the crossed rifles of Army infantry, the unit designation from her deployment in the Hindu Kush. She transferred it carefully to her captain's uniform jacket, stitching it in place with the kind of precision she brought to everything, slow, methodical, each stitch exactly where it belonged. When she was finished, she held the jacket up to the hotel window. The patch caught the light. The next morning, she stood in front of a room of 30 Army nurses at Fort Lewis Medical Center, all of them wearing the same digital camouflage uniforms she'd worn, all of them carrying the weight of decisions made under fire, decisions that had to be made with incomplete information and terrible choices. You're going to encounter situations where the world tries to convince you that you're less than what you are, Katie said. Her voice carried the weight of command now, no deferential edge, no accommodation for doubt. You're going to be placed in positions where your expertise is questioned, where your value is challenged, where someone with power decides you're a liability. Your response to that moment determines everything. She paused. The nurses were watching her. Listening. In this room, no one knows your real name. No one knows what you've done. No one knows what you're capable of. That's the nature of what we do. We operate in spaces where our work is classified, where our sacrifices are officially unacknowledged. But the work is real. The lives saved are real. And the moment your call sign finds you again, you need to be ready to step back into that identity without hesitation, without apology, without looking back at who you had to pretend to be. She pointed to the patch on her uniform. I kept this because I knew who I was. Even when I was folding aprons. Even when I was being told I was stealing. Even when I was at rock bottom. The mission doesn't change. The uniform is just fabric. What matters is the commitment you made, and the commitment you're willing to keep. One of the nurses raised her hand. Did something happen to you? Katie looked at her. My son's commanding officer had a heart attack in a restaurant where I was working undercover. His name was Colonel Marcus Webb. I saved his life. And that moment, that single moment of using who I actually was, ended the operation and brought me home. The room went still. That was the kind of still where everyone understood they'd just heard something that mattered, something beyond the official curriculum, something real. Sometimes the bravest warriors don't carry guns, Katie said. Sometimes they carry stethoscopes, and they wait for the moment when they're needed, and they don't hesitate. That's your job now. Stay ready. She ended the briefing at 11:51 a.m. By 12:53 p.m., she was back in scrubs at Seattle General's Trauma Bay, running a code blue on a 73-year-old man who'd suffered an anterior wall MI. The monitors were screaming. The nurses were moving with practiced precision. The attending physician was calling rhythm checks. Katie pushed 1 milligram of Epi 4. Continue compressions. Let's get him perfused. The attending glanced at her, Captain Rodriguez, consulting nurse, authority written into every gesture. He didn't question her. He executed. 12 minutes later, they got sinus rhythm back. The patient's eyes opened. He was going to make it. He was going to go home to his family and wonder for the rest of his life why his life had been saved by a woman in scrubs with a unit patch on her jacket, a woman whose presence seemed to shift the gravitational field around her, whose competence made everything feel possible. Katie stripped off her gloves and disposed of them in the red biohazard bag. One of the junior nurses watched her walk past, watched the way she moved with the terrifying fluid precision of someone who'd made these decisions under mortar fire, who'd held people together in conditions that shouldn't have been survivable. "Who is she?" the junior nurse whispered. The attending looked at Katie disappearing into the supply room. Someone who decided that this was where her fight was. Someone who chose scrubs over medals. That night, sitting on the balcony of her apartment overlooking Elliott Bay, Katie held her phone. It showed a message from Webb, sent 6 months ago but forwarded to her just now. Daniel made Lieutenant Colonel. He's coming home for 2 weeks. Let's get dinner. She texted back, I'll bring the wine. The response came immediately, you always do. Sometimes the most powerful moments aren't the ones with salutes and ceremonies and federal agents walking villains away in handcuffs. Sometimes they're quiet moments, moments where you get to be both versions of yourself at once, the nurse and the soldier, the hidden identity and the woman standing in the light. Sometimes the bravest warriors carry stethoscopes, not guns, and they wait in silence for the moment their call sign finds them again, and they answer without hesitation, without apology, and without ever looking back at who they had to pretend to be. Thank you for being here. If you're enjoying this story, please like and subscribe. And we always love hearing from you. Drop a comment and tell us what state or country you're in.